there is a mystery, a vast mystery about origins of culture, about origins of civilization, about what was going on this planet prior to recorded history. And clearly when you begin looking at information like this, to me it's pointing in that direction, that there's a whole other dimension of history that's been completely neglected within the official accounts. And it could be that there's, I think, perhaps political reasons for that. Again, getting down to the idea that, as Mircea Eliade said, what we have is an attempt to trivialize our own history to the point where it's been demystified. Because everything now is defined, and all you have to do is go to the proper authority to get the final explanation on everything. You know, evolution, Darwinian evolution explains the origin of life. You know, this linear ascendance from, you know, the old Stone Age to the new Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, and then finally to the Industrial Revolution and to where we're at now, is all worked out, and there's no mystery. I would suggest that that's a very misleading concept, that there's a very deep mystery about our own origins on this planet. And one fact that I frequently like to emphasize is that we modern humans, according at least to the most recent anthropological research, entities, creatures exactly identical to ourselves have been around on this planet for at least 150,000 years. At least. Perhaps 200,000 years or longer. Well, what that implies is very interesting because our recorded history goes back 5,000 years. So if you look at a timeline, you know, if this stick represents the whole of human history, since we Homo sapiens sapiens have been walking around on this planet, our recorded history is 1 inch. So here's our recorded history. We go back 1 inch and we're back in, you know, ancient Egypt, ancient Sumeria. What was going on all the rest of this time that humans were inhabiting this planet? And why is there no record of what they were doing? You know, what we've been, the kind of the stereotype that we've been sort of given here is, you know, the caveman archetype. You know, people living in caves and presumably not figuring out that there was a way that you could actually accumulate knowledge, transmit knowledge, you know. So this went on for 100,000 or 200,000 years, and then apparently out of boredom, people got up all of a sudden one day and said, let's start civilization. So they went and they built a 480-foot one tall pyramid in Egypt that couldn't be duplicated today. They built these astronomical observatories all over the planet. I think clearly there's a whole other dimension to our story on this planet that perhaps prior to our generation was not accessible. Because a lot of the information and stuff like, for example, that I've pulled together here, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you couldn't have pulled this information together. I mean, discoveries within the last few decades, like all of the recreations of these things that I've been showing you, a lot of those are only 10 years old, 20 years old. We're learning things now because we have remote sensing capabilities. We have radar that can penetrate into the ground and see things that's underground. You know, we can see perspectives from outer space that we couldn't see before. And once you get this broader perspective, you can begin to see things that you can't see when you're down, you know, too close to it. So what I'm trying to do is get people fired up about finding out this big story that's basically the missing story of the human species on this planet. For the main reason, the pragmatic reason, is that I think that in order to maximize our probabilities of having a successful future, we need to understand our authentic past. And if we don't understand our authentic past, it diminishes our probabilities of having a successful future considerably. Because as they say, you know, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, there's a big, big chunk of our past that's been forgotten. But I think that it still can be recovered. And one way it can be recovered is the fact that we have mythology. And mythology is the record of what happened, what transpired to the human species on this planet prior to the written record. So we go back and we have the historical record that sort of fades out into the myths of the past between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, and then we get into the mythic record. And up till now, the attitude has been, well, myth represents, primitive mind, ignorant mind, pre-scientific mind, inventing and conjuring up these images to try to explain what they couldn't understand. That the gods did this and the gods did that, and this is how they explained the workings of the world. Well, see, I don't think that that's an accurate interpretation at all. I think that myth actually represents a very scientific way of explaining the world. And it uses symbols, symbology, just like modern science does. It's just that the symbols it uses are very different than the kinds of symbols modern science uses. But they're symbols that can be transmitted. They can be transmitted orally. They can be transmitted in the form of art. They can be transmitted in the form of song and epic poetry. They can be transmitted in the form of ritual. They can be transmitted in the form of architecture. All of these things are vehicles for the transmission of this kind of mythic wisdom or the mythic history. And so it has a way of perpetuating itself because it has this diverse method by which it can propagate itself through all of these different avenues. And we're in a position now where, a very privileged position, because not a generation or two ago, nobody had access to the kind of information that we now have access to. And we're in a position now where we can begin really assembling these pieces to see the coherent image much better than or more effectively than anybody could have prior to our own time. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was not possible. I mean, there were some philosophers, some occultists, some spiritually oriented people through whatever means or other were able to access stuff, but it was not possible to scientifically corroborate anything. If somebody went into a deep state of meditation and began to channel information, it could be used as a guideline, but there was no method of verification. Whereas now we're in a situation where we can verify things and we can see things from these enhanced perspectives. And we have resources of information, abundant information nobody ever had before. It's like taking a puzzle with 5,000 pieces and scattering the pieces far and wide. And now we're in a position where we can start reassembling those pieces into a coherent image, which is the image of our own past and origin on this planet, which I think is far more profound than what we've been led to believe, that as a result of some accidental sequence of events in natural selection and so forth. So on that note, let's continue with some of the stuff we've been looking at here. I'll give you a few glimpses into how the system works. The encoding of information.